Yeah, hi, I'm Hannah. I'm going to talk about my first programming project that I did in Python. So I learned Python on a Code First Girls course about a year and a half ago. When I finished that, I needed a project to continue to learn Python, and this is what I did. But yeah, I would have liked this to be more complete than it actually is, but I've just been finishing my thesis, so there are a couple of things I didn't actually manage to finish in time to come here. And also it's written in Python 2 because when I did the Code First Girls course, they installed Python 2 on my computer, so that's just what I used. So when I finished that course, I was looking for something to continue learning. And at the time, my friend was working for an air pollution charity. And she talked a lot about how they wanted to find a way to communicate air pollution to a wider audience than just on their website, I guess. And yeah, she talked a lot about why you should care about air pollution. I mean, we hear quite a lot about it in the news, but I used to mostly ignore it. But it is really bad for you. It's bad for your health. It can reduce your intelligence. It's actually also bad for solar power. If there's lots of air pollution, it blocks the sun. And there are two main air pollutants that she talked about anyway. There's nitrous oxides, which you probably have heard of from the VW scandal and the fact that burning diesel cars produce quite a lot of nitrous oxides, and they have the added problem of being a very potent greenhouse gas. So bad for global warming as well. And the other one people talk about quite a lot is particulate matter, which is essentially just dust. It comes from burning things like fossil fuels. It also comes from when you brake and your tires grind down and things like that. And there are others as well that people talk about a lot less. Oh yeah, that's bad for you. It can cause heart problems. There's other pollutants as well, like ozone and sulfur dioxide, which are talked about a lot less. So I haven't put those in my Twitter bot. So you'll probably all know what a Twitter bot is. There's lots of them online. Something like 15% of accounts on Twitter at one point were bots and not like actual people. So here are some examples. There's the one which shows you how far through the year you are. It tweets every week, just to terrify you a little bit. There's funny ones like the Louis Theroux bot, which tweets scenarios about who Louis Theroux could be going to interview next. And there's the useful ones as well, like the Thread Reader app, which when you tweet at it unroll, it creates a web page of like the whole thread of Twitter for people to share around. There's the bad side of this as well, obviously. There's the Russian troll bots, which retweet things about anti-vaccines or anti-immigrant sentiment, or there's also quite a lot pushing cryptocurrency scams. So there's the bad side as well, but I still decided that a good way of getting air pollution data out there would be to build a Twitter bot. So my Twitter bot tweets the air pollution of Sheffield city centre. It is here. Yeah. And why did I choose to build a bot as a first project? Well, when I looked into this, most people said because you can. Obviously, there's quite a lot on Twitter already, so why not add your own one? Some Twitter bots are useful. You learn lots of skills, which I will go through during this talk. It's easy to start as a beginner, although I will say that Twitter has recently changed its policy. It used to be really, really easy to go onto Twitter, say you wanted to develop something, and then they would give you the keys and the passwords to access their API. Because of all the problems they're having with the bad bots, you do now have to have some kind of justification in there as to why you want to build a bot, and I'm led to believe it's a little bit more difficult. And it's also a really good introduction to APIs. So this talk is aimed at people like me when I was first starting, so I'm now going to tell you what an API is. So an API is an application programming interface. It is the way that the website talks to the back end of the website. So when you log into Twitter and you put in your login and your password, it sends a message to the back end of the website via the API saying, please come and get all the stuff that I want to display on my page. And then there's the other side as well. You can also post things. So if you want to write a status, you send a post request to the API, and then it appears on the website. And here is an example of a GET request in Python 2 using erlib2. So you write the where you're sending the request to, what the website is, and then you ask it for the data, open the response, and then you load it, and it generally gives back something called JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's easy to read and write, and it kind of just looks like a dictionary, but it's a dictionary with nested dictionaries inside it. So in this example, you have the key values, and then once you put in values, you get out a list of further dictionaries. So how does one access the Twitter API was my next question on how to build this. Luckily, there's a really, really nice package for accessing the Twitter API, which makes it really, really easy for everyone. It is called tweepy. Someone yesterday told me that accessing the Twitter API without tweepy is actually pretty miserable, but I never had any experience of that because tweepy made it really, really simple. All you have to do is import it. You put in some, like, they're cool keys. They're essentially passwords that Twitter will give you, and then tweepy will authenticate you, and then there's lots of very easy functions to collect data or post data from Twitter. So then I knew that I could fairly easily access the Twitter API. So the first thing I did before I started programming was make a little structure. So I decided that I would connect to an API and get data, and then I would process the data, and then it would tweet the data. And then I had to work out where I was going to get the data from. So Defra collects a lot of data about air pollution. It has a website that provides information on what different air pollutants do, and it provides forecasts and up-to-date information about what the air pollution is doing. And if you click around for a while, you eventually find out that they do have an API. The API is really hard to find. When you go on their website and go to the bit where it says APIs, it doesn't list this API as existing. And I emailed them, do you have an API? And they emailed back 3 months later saying, yes, we do have an API. Then they didn't tell me where to find it. But by then, I had actually found a web page which it said that it was for their API. It was called UK Air SOS. And at the top of the page, it had this lovely diagram. And I didn't understand it at all, and I got really, really scared and just sort of clicked off it. I was like, I'm just not going to do this. At the time, I just started an internship with an organization called Zooniverse, who do citizen science, and someone there who was very, very nice, called Cam, spent a little while looking around for me, trying to find how I could access this API. And he found 2 web addresses that I could get data from. So the first one listed all of the stations, all the air pollution stations in the UK, and the other one was a way of getting Timeseries data from those stations. So then I was on to the processing of the data. That was fairly easy. The data came back in JSON like this. All I had to do was say, get the values out like it was a dictionary, and then say, get the last one in the list of dictionaries, and then process the data in some fairly easy if functions to find out if it was high or low. And then the final part of building this initial Twitter bot was to tweet the information. And again, tweepy makes this really, really easy. To update your status with tweepy is literally this little bit at the bottom, which is API, update status, and then what you want to update it to. So that made everything really nice and simple. So at that point, I had everything up and running. it tweeted, and here it is. But it only ran when it was on my laptop, and when the program was running on my laptop and my laptop was on, which is not convenient for something that's supposed to tweet regularly. So again, I was doing my internship, and they had a server, and they very nicely said, would you like to put your Twitter bot on our server? I was like, yes, please. I said, okay, but you have to you have to Dockerize it. And I went, what is Docker? How do I use this thing? And the first thing I learned about Docker was it had a very lovely logo. And then they told me that Docker is a thing that makes a container, which also didn't help me. So I did, well, then they tried to explain to me what Docker is, and this is my summary of what they explained to me. So Docker, a container isolates your code and your program from everything else that is running on your computer or server or whatever. And in the past, this would be done quite often using a virtual machine, but that requires you to have an operating system which then runs your libraries and programs, which then runs your app. And this can take up quite a lot of space. Whereas with Docker, you don't need the whole guest operating system. You just have one operating system, which then runs, which the Docker engine interacts with, and then runs all of your libraries and your apps. So you can fit more on because they take up less space. And when I did this initially, it seemed very, very simple. I sat down with Cam, who was helping with this, and we made a Docker file, and we ran Docker, and it magically worked. And then more recently, I wanted to move it off of their server onto a Raspberry Pi that I'd been given. So I installed Docker on my Raspberry Pi fairly easily, and then I ran the practice one they give you to make sure that it works. And then I tried to Dockerize this, and it just completely failed, and I don't actually know what I've done wrong. And I would have finished it, but I had a thesis to finish, and that took priority, unfortunately. So I have not actually got Docker running on my Raspberry Pi yet, but soon it will run off my Raspberry Pi. So yeah, it's running there now. And once I had it up and running, people then started to say, well, what about the air pollution elsewhere? Like, can you make it so that when we tweet at your Twitter bot, it replies and says what the air pollution is in, say, Newcastle or Cardiff. So luckily, again, tweepy provides a way for you to see when someone is writing particular tweets. So there's a thing called the streaming API. It makes a sort of WebSocket where it's communicating between your computer and the tweepy API and the Twitter API. And when a keyword is said, it will send the tweet and the information to your computer. So setting up the this part is fairly easily to make a listener. This is the code. I pretty much copied it off of a tutorial I found online. So you have the bit where you're setting up the stream listener, and then the bit at the bottom you can see where I've said, I want to listen out for tweets which contain @ChefAirPol, which is the name of my Twitter bot, or what's the air pollution in. And then it sends those tweets to the computer. So I got that bit up and running fairly easily. I got tweets came through nicely. But then I came into problems again with the Defra API. So it was fairly easy to just say that you had to have a specific structure. So when the tweet came in, it had to say, what's the air pollution in, and then the name of the place, and you could split it on the in and get the where they're looking at. But then you then had to try and find the data for that particular place. I assumed when I started this that the Defra API would be set up something like this. So you'd have the main API, and then you would have there would be a number for each station, so Aberdeen, and then in Aberdeen there would be data for all of the different pollutants, and that would be like one station and one call that I could make. But in fact, the Defra API is set up so that each individual pollutant has its own station. So you have to make multiple calls, and you have to try and work out which station is for which pollutant. And finding out what the station number is also quite difficult. So in this, what you're after is finding this number, 455, to get the data. Like, this is the number that varies. And when you go on the list of stations, it gives you an ID for each station. So the top one here is 735. And I just sort of assumed that 735 would go in the slot. So here it's 452, would go in that slot. But that's not what happens. If you do that, it breaks. The 735 is just a key to then go to another page. So you do station / and then that number. And then it brings you up more information about that station, where there should be a time series key. And the time series key is a key in the JSON. It's not a value. And there are two possible numbers that you can get out of this, and you have to try and work out which one is the key that you want. And it's not always in the same order, and there's actually very little difference in the data in each key, and it took me a long time to work this out. But eventually, I did get it to work. So it finds the place in the tweet, finds the nearest station, and then goes and gets the data and processes the data. And there's some examples here. So the air pollution in Gravesend, which is where I grew up, Leeds, Newcastle. It quite happily went and got the air pollution data. And I was really, really excited, and I went running to my friends, can you have a go, see what you can do? And the first thing they did was break the Twitter bot and make it crash. They asked questions like, what's the air pollution in Mars, The air pollution in Beijing, which Defra, funnily enough, doesn't have data on. And then one of my friends tried to get it to break my computer, print bananas. This doesn't work, luckily. It just crashes the program. So basically what I learned from this is that my users will not do what I want them to do. And I need to put a lot more caveats in there so that it doesn't just crash the program all the time. I haven't managed to put these in place yet, so it is not up and running, unfortunately. And this is as far as I have got in building my Twitter bot. I did fully plan on having it up and running for people to use now, but because of my thesis, it is not up and running. But I've learned a hell of a lot along the way. I've learned a lot about connecting to APIs. I've learned about JSON, writing functions, dictionaries, and I've learned a little bit about Docker, even if I don't fully understand it still. And I'm excited to continue to learn more things while I'm finishing building this. So I'd just like to thank quite a lot of people. I did this for my internship, and someone called Cam Allen gave me a lot of help in building this. I'd like to thank Code First Girls for teaching me Python, and to all of the people who gave me advice on building the Twitter bot and then breaking it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for a great talk. Thank you for a great talk. I really enjoyed that. It's one of those great PyCon talks where there's so much in it. Just pointing out that this is actually her first talk, and I thought that was really fantastic. So let's give her a big round of applause again. Okay, do we have any questions? Yeah, one there.
Hello.
Hello.
Could you please put those web addresses back on the screen so I can finish writing them down?
Yeah. Somewhere. There you go.
Yes, those ones. Awesome.
Any other questions?
Hi. You mentioned your PhD briefly. Can you talk a bit more about how you think Python might be useful for people doing a PhD?
Sure. So I think mostly during my PhD, I did quite a lot of things in R, but I found using Python to access data through API is a lot easier, I guess. So if you ever want to like send and receive data regularly, using Python was a really easy way of doing that. I know a lot of people use it for data analysis as well. Obviously, there is R2, but Python and pandas and things has a very nice, like that was pretty useful, especially if you've got larger data sets. Yeah.
Would you have any advice for Defra if they were contemplating a version 2 of their API?
I would suggest that they provide an example of how to get data at the top of their web page so that when people arrive on it, they can immediately start using it and not panic and run away from the web page. And probably, I don't know, like make a diagram that actually tells you how to use the API and not, I still don't know what that diagram was of. It's still at the top of their page and it's not explained. It's just like, look, we made a nice diagram. Yeah.
If there are no further questions, let's all thank Hannah one more time.